Nature and Man by Heinrich Pesch, excerpted from the Lehrbuch der Nationalökonomie, Volume 1. Not all of the truths and concepts which are necessary for the study of economics are to be found in that science itself. Many ideas are already current in everyday life, even before scientific reflection comes to grips with them and provides them with sharper definition through careful analysis. Many a truth which the economist must accept as a guiding principle has its origin in the domain of other sciences, where it is formulated, tested, and established. Such truths, already prerequisite to the study of economics, even though they may be developed further by their application to the area of economics, include in particular certain principles dealing with a. Man's relationship to his natural environment, b. Man's relationship to the world of goods, c. Man's relationship to the rest of society. 1. Man as Lord of the world according to God's ordinance. 1. The fact of man's dominion over the world of nature and the basis for it. The fact that man has dominion over the world is undeniable. It is reaffirmed constantly throughout the course of history whenever progress is achieved in the area of material culture. The basis for that dominion, however, is to be found in the will of God, who assigned it to the father of the human race by virtue of the fact that he bestowed a rational nature on man, elevating him to a status essentially higher than that enjoyed by the world of matter and plants and animals. Without this exaltation, man's conquest of his environment would lack any satisfactory explanation as to how it began and how it persists, as well as any practical significance. From this fact, we are able to derive two important conclusions. A. The basis for man's dominion is unchangeable. The particular structure which it assumes is changeable. Human nature is not the product of history, but of creation. Insofar as its essential, intrinsic, physical, and metaphysical elements are concerned, it is immune from all historical changes. Man is always and everywhere composed of a body and a soul, as he is always and everywhere a physical, rational being. But the potential and the qualities which are contained in his nature are like seeds capable of and in need of development, for the sake of both the individual and the human race. In the manner in which they develop and fulfill themselves, they are influenced by extrinsic conditions and circumstances which vary. Specifically, the actual affirmation and determination and development of the concrete configuration of man's dominion over the material world takes place in a protracted process, and often by slow, painful progress, moving all of the way from bare survival to the more highly developed contexts where materials and energies are forcefully harnessed. B. Rational nature is the common property of all of mankind. That is why all persons alike are called to participate in one way or another in enforcing man's dominion over the natural environment. By the same token, all must be enabled to share in the fruits of this dominion, which is, in fact, based on man's rational nature. The intensive and extensive increase in that participation, along with the expansion of man's dominion over nature, represent indicators of a progressing culture. 2. The purpose and norm of that dominion. Without the assistance provided by our natural environment, man would be deprived of the prerequisite and the material foundation for any higher cultural endeavor. And in fact, even his mere physical existence and survival would be impossible. The preservation and development of life, the development of physical and intellectual capacities occurs with the help of the things which are round about us. The world is our domicile, our garden, our workplace. It serves the intellect as the object of its investigation, and it leads us to the knowledge and love of the Creator. From it we can and ought to fulfill our lives and our potential, and derive those objects which we need for our livelihood. Therefore, if the deeper and ideal basis for man's dominion over the world is to be found in his being made in the image of God, who is the ultimate and highest purpose of his supernatural destiny, that same dominion nevertheless has a very real and more proximate basis and purpose manifesting itself in the natural conditions of our bodily and intellectual existence here on this earth. We are saying that man is compelled by his nature and by the nature of his environment to subject the earth to his service in a purposeful and continuous manner, since it is only in this way that he can achieve the satisfaction of his wants and assure his being able to continue doing so on a continuing basis. 2. work as the means to exercise dominion over the world. Man, who is ordained and empowered to be the Lord over his environment, accomplishes this dominion and makes use of it by his work. 1. The concept and nature of work. Work is the systematic application and expenditure of human energy to produce or acquire a good or utility. Work is a human and therefore a personal activity. It is the expenditure of human, i.e., intellectual and bodily energy, in the service of the human individual or social personality, intended to generate a utility or a good which can satisfy the wants and accomplish the purposes arising from the nature of the human person and the purposes of human life. The capacity of the human being to work is ultimately a gift from God, a component of the natural endowment of the human personality, and in the way it is sustained and accomplished, it is a direct result and a part of man's vital energy. It would be a denial of these incontestable truths if we were to view man's capacity to work and his engagement in work on the same level as material things, and if we regarded the production resulting from man's working capacity on the same plane as the creation of material goods. It is not only physical exertion which is included in the concept work. Man's mind is also in operation in all areas of human endeavor. It is active wherever man functions as man, not only in the scholar's study but equally in the workshop, the factory, and in the work of managers as well as of those who carry out their instructions. Work involves an expenditure of energy, a personal exertion, which is associated with burden, sacrifice, and not seldom also with pain. Yet our needs force us to work and to undergo the burden and the fatigue, just as these also determine the way in which we direct our work. The amount of goods which a man will have at his disposal generally depends on the amount and kind of labor that he has applied. It is by these facts, and in all instances also due to man's dependence on the world around him for satisfying his wants, that hopes and efforts to reduce the pressure of work generally always find their limits, even though progress in one or the other direction may facilitate matters. 2. The law of work is as all-encompassing as the law of death. All persons must work, and work purposefully, until they return to the dust from which they came. However, work is not only generally a matter of bitter necessity for man, it is also his honor and his joy. Even though it may require difficult sacrifices in terms of personal effort, nevertheless, among all of the various problems which may bear down on a man, work still exerts the least pressure. The greater interest a person has in his work, the more joy he will experience in his work, and conversely, taking pleasure in one's work increases the person's interest in it, as well as its effectiveness and results. The law of work applies, generally to all human beings. If we consider work in the broadest sense, including all kinds of physically and morally possible, and mentally or bodily purposeful, personal application of energy, it appears to be not only a human law, which is incumbent on all humanity as such, but also a law obligating each individual to the extent that special circumstances like age, health, etc. do not limit or prevent one from engaging in strenuous activity. Now, if we are dealing with physical labor, which is directed toward satisfying wants for material things, it represents what is in fact a human law, but not one binding on each individual. Not every person has to take a shovel in hand, but he ought also not live off the labor of others without any attempt on his part to do something useful. Drones are the products of history, personal failings, or social developments, not of nature, and they are not a part of the order that is willed by God. The law of work is, permanent, ongoing law. Wants keep recurring. Repeated and constant work is especially necessary to extract the resources of nature, and to replace goods that have been used up by others. Without continuing, exhaustive, and orderly work, mankind cannot survive. The world of nature will not be brought to subjection, and development and progress will not take place, either for the individual or for nations, or for the entire human race. Natural necessity and moral obligation are associated and combine themselves in various ways when we are discussing the law of work. What ought to be is rooted in man's actual being. 3. The service provided by our natural environment. If man is the Lord of creation in accordance with God's will, it nevertheless remains a fact, on the other hand, that 1. The world will always be God's property. Nobody, and nothing can alter the essential subordination to God, since it is based on the title of original creation, and on the fact that God continues to sustain it. God would have to stop being God if he wanted to surrender what is his most exalted possession, his ultimate dominion over the world which he created. Herein lies the reason why man is never and nowhere the absolute Lord, and also the reason why his dominion over this earth never and nowhere exists without its corresponding obligation. He cannot wheel and deal as he pleases with the world of creation. As God's vassal, he has to observe the destiny and the purposes which the earth, with all of its resources and various kinds of energy, is supposed to provide according to God's will. And in the production and consumption of material goods, man must always and everywhere subject himself to the order which God has established for the world. Only then will the things which make up our environment become truly and actually goods for us, and have value for us. Now it is true that the misuse of created things can sometimes or even frequently satisfy our sensual appetites in some way. However, what satisfies exclusively the lower part of man's nature still does not represent a genuine good, for the whole man, who as a rational moral being is responsible to the all-high God. 4. Man is lord of the world within the framework of society. 1. The social nature of man. Man is dependent by nature on his fellow man in various ways. In order to achieve many essential and legitimate objectives in our lives, we cannot dispense with continual human assistance. For us, there is no such thing as absolute self-sufficiency. Isolated man would not only suffer a deficiency of potential, but he would not even be in a position to eke out a dignified livelihood. Thomas Aquinas pointed out that nature provided animals with clothing, food, and weapons for their defense, namely their instincts. But for man, nature provided hands to work with, an intellect to think with, and society so that one person would help the other. The ability to communicate by language, the natural disposition of benevolence, the recognition of common needs and interests all make it clear that human nature demands more than simply many individuals existing side by side. It requires reciprocity, association, community, and sociable unity among individuals. This social nature is peculiar to the human species. Its development occupies a dominant position in the way the history of mankind unfolds. If we are primarily preoccupied here with how that social unity comes to bear in the economic sphere, we do not therefore fail to take note that man's social nature and social activity is not confined to economic life. Intellectual and moral accomplishments, as in religion, art, and science, transcend by far the pedestrian considerations that have to do with making a living. Yet the economic sphere does occupy an important position in human society. In fact, we may be permitted to say that it represents the underlying basis and indispensable prerequisite for all higher kinds of human activity by individuals in society. However, among the means by which mutual fulfillment occurs in society, we have to consider, with regard to economic life, especially, 2, the combination and the division of labor. By combining one's energies with those of others, much is achieved which could not be accomplished by an individual acting by himself. On the other hand, the division of labor enables each one to concentrate all of his energy on a particular and limited kind of activity, thus making it possible for him to become more proficient at what he is doing. That holds not only for occupational division of labor, but also for a more technical division of functions in the household, in the shop, in the factory, etc. 4. The principle of solidarity. When we speak of solidarity with regard to social life, we have in mind, in a most general sense, first of all, social interdependence, the actual minimal dependence of people on one another, the exchange of goods and the assistance which people render to one another, and their continuous productive cooperation is conditioned by a special abundance of strength on the part of those who are destined to help one another. The welfare of one and the other therefore emerges not merely as a result of various complementary forces, but also as the prerequisite of a broader contributing beneficial cooperation, and therefore of the greater good of all. This reciprocal dependence on the well-being of other persons in society is therefore no mere de facto relationship. Inasmuch as the reciprocity and community of interests has its foundation in man's rational nature as one of its imperatives, solidarity also represents a moral relationship between man and his fellow man. Even if the downfall of one's fellow man were to one's advantage, one is not permitted to wish for this. let alone help to bring it about. Social intercourse is supposed to be a benefit and a blessing for mankind, not a curse and a source of its corruption. Thus, even though an individual may look after his own interests, he must at the same time have regard for the legitimate interests of others, who as human beings have an equal claim to happiness, well-being, and the benefits to be derived from social living. The philosopher Heinrich Pesch told us, human society is not merely an aggregation of individuals who happen to find themselves thrown together and chance to know each other or rub elbows. First, each is his own person, but then each person is also placed within the organic bond of the community. No one lives merely as an individual person without at the same time being a member of the whole race, and he is therefore required to have regard for others while at the same time being entitled to expect them to have regard for him. Human life, of its nature, has its various objectives, which can only be achieved by the orderly cooperation of many. This natural law of community and reciprocity permeates all of the various spheres of life, the higher as well as the lower ones. Let no one say, therefore, I live by myself and for myself. The weal and woe of others does not concern me. Such an outlook would be unnatural. That is because the conduct of each individual naturally has an influence on others and on the community. And in a certain respect, the community in turn carries the individual along with it. The honor and dishonor of the individual has a bearing on the community, and individuals share in the well-being of the whole community. If the principle of solidarity is a valid norm of our conduct, even for human society in its broadest dimensions and at every level, and for every kind of human intercourse, then, as we shall see later, it has even greater importance at the higher levels of society. And there, in turn, its importance grows along with the increasing complexity of social phenomena.